What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit the like button and let me know what you think of today's discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or living on a rock and seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another Sit Down video. As always, we are presented by Barstool Sports. And before we get into the video, here on a Saturday, I want to give two shout outs. It's important for me that we continue to grow this genre, and I don't give away approval very often. I think there are some great content creators in this genre, and they're keeping it alive. One of the content creators I want you to check out is one that I owe a bit of gratitude to. The ColomboMafia.com is one of the best websites out for information regarding various members and associates of the Colombo Crime Family. The people over there do tireless research and work and do a great job of presenting it in written form. If you're looking for a great resource on the Colombo Crime Family, make sure you take a look at the ColomboMafia.com. Some of the information in today's video comes from it. Go check it out. I also want to shout out to all of the moms out there. I know every week we continue to gain female subscribers and viewers, and I want to shout out to all of you. Being a mother is one of the greatest things that can be offered today in the world. We all love our mothers, and we appreciate them. So if you're a mother and you're watching this, happy Mother's Day. Let's get in, ladies and gentlemen, to another very interesting organized crime topic. And I got to tell you, today's video is really, to me, one of the more interesting and fascinating that I've gotten into. There's so much in this. In fact, there's actually a pretty incredible mother in this video that we're going to talk about. A really interesting family within a family. As customary on this channel, I actually try to get in to more than just one mobster. I try to get into more of a family within a family. And today's family is quite known throughout Brooklyn. If you've ever been to the Gennaro Feast, you also know them as well. We're going to get into the story of a father and son who never actually have become members of the mafia, but they've had a long-standing involvement in two families, as well as becoming known for not only food, but Christmas lights. The story of little Angelo Spata next on the Sit Down. Angelo Spata was born June 13th, 1974 in Brooklyn, New York. He would grow up in the mostly Italian enclave of Dyker Heights in Brooklyn. Now, this is where Spata's story right away becomes very interesting. Angelo Spata's mother and father were very well known for multiple things in and around Brooklyn, Manhattan, and other boroughs. Angelo Spata Sr. was from Palermo, Sicily, and would get into the butcher trade. Ultimately, he would begin to run what is now known as Lucy's Sausage Stand. Essentially, he and his wife, who would meet in their teens, would run a food stand and butcher shop that would essentially be involved in many of the feasts involving Italian saints in and around Brooklyn, Manhattan, and others, including San Gennaro, as we know. His mother, Lucy Spata, the woman that the stand is named after, has a very well-known sausage and peppers. In fact, wise guys commend it. I have to admit, I actually have been to this stand at one point when I went to the San Gennaro Feast. It's one of the best sausage sandwiches you'll eat. And if you're watching this video and have had it, you know it. The Spatas were very well known. Now, the interesting thing about Angelo Spata is that he has really become and was an associate of the Gambino crime family really since the late 70s into the 80s. It was said that early in the career of Lucy's Sausage Stand, Angelo Spata was regularly kicking up to an individual called Olimpio Garofalo. Now, we've talked about him in previous videos. He was a very old school captain in the Gambino crime family. After he would pass away in the mid-'80s, it was said that Spata was kicking up to Jackie Knows D'Amico. According to Mikey Scars DeLeonardo, he would say that it was much talked about that the Spatas were well known. Everybody knew them in Brooklyn. They were from Brooklyn. And, they had always been associated with the Gambino crime family. At one point, Mikey Scars would essentially say that Spata Sr. Got his rocks off by hanging out around Gambino members. He was seen around social clubs occasionally. He always got a kick of hanging around. And, eventually he would become kind of an important part of the feast because he would teach his son, little Angelo Spata, kind of the roles of how important feasts are. And this would become a very important part of how little Angelo Spata became a really, quite frankly, underrated associate of the Gambinos and then ultimately the Colombo crime family. Now, little Angelo would learn the business growing up. And on the surface, it really seemed like his mother and father raised him the right way. He was known in his teens and high school at Severian High School in Brooklyn to, help clean up streets. He was a very nice kid, seemingly on the surface. It seemed like his mother, Lucy, raised him the right way. In fact, the Spatas were also known for other things as well. It was said that in the 80s, when they moved to Diker Heights, his mother was quoted at one point saying that there were no decorations on the block for Christmas, and that Christmas meant a lot to her. So her and her husband decided to start decorating. It would eventually make a national news and is now known as a place that people want to go around Christmas time to see Christmas lights. Lucy Spata was really the matriarch of that whole thing. So little Angelo grew up pretty well. He would eventually graduate from high school in 1992 and enter St. John's University. Now, little Angelo wouldn't last long in college. He would drop out after one semester. Now, one interesting connection to the Gambino crime family as well, to the Spatas, was that little Angelo's godfather was actually Joe Butch Correa. Now, we've done a video, on Joe Butch that can be seen here. It was also said by Mikey Scars that little Angelo got a kick out of the fact that Joe Butch, a gangster, was his godfather. And as we know from the video that we did, Joe Butch Correa would go to prison, and eventually his son, Vinny Butch Correa, would begin taking care of his rackets and making his collections. Now, little Angelo Spata, upon leaving college, would become Vinny Butch Correa's driver. And as I said in the video on the Correos, one thing about them is their physical attributes. The Correos were known and were big guys. They were tall, they were big. In fact, Joe Butch Correa, as far as I know, is one of the tallest people ever associated with the mafia. And Vinny Butch was a big guy as well. Now, the interesting thing about little Angelo was his diminutive size. It was said he was only in like the mid to low 5 foot. Like, he was a small guy. And people said they would get a kick out of seeing Vinny Butch and little Angelo because one was huge and the other was very small. Little Angelo was starting to understand not only the feast, but he was also starting to understand the mafia. This is where the FBI would put him on their radar. By the mid-90s, though, little Angelo's life changes big time. And as I've said in the mafia, if you cannot kill, there are two things that are going to allow you to become very respected in the mob. One of which is making money, which we'll get into. Little Angelo did it at a very high level, and connections. If you're connected to important people, not only are you going to get some sort of prestige, but it's also going to afford you the ability to stay safe. And that's exactly what little Angelo did, and he knew it. In the mid-90s, he began dating a Brooklyn girl called Susan. Now, Susan had a very famous last name. She was the daughter of Carmine the Snake Persico. Now, according to an underworld figure that knew little Angelo Spata, he would tell me that Carmine, quote, loved little Angelo Spata. He would ultimately begin a very important relationship with Carmine's daughter. And in 1996, little Angelo and Susan Persico would get married. This is where little Angelo's stock really, really rises. He begins palling around little Alley Boy Persico, his brother-in-law and Carmine's son. And what we start to find out is that little Angelo Spata can make a lot of money. Now, it was said by Mikey Scars that on his wedding day, he would tell little Angelo that he was going to release him under Gambino control to Ali Boy Persico and the Colombo Crime Family. Michael Scars would say that it was a gift to little Angelo on his wedding day. Now, I want to get into the various involvement of little Angelo Spata in the various feasts in and around New York. This is something that not a lot of people have talked about. The involvement of the mafia in the various feasts has been widely reported, most notably the San Gennaro feast. The Genovese crime family have had control of that feast for years, as well as the Bonanno crime family. I know fellow content creator OC Shorts did a really good video recently on a guy called Perry Criscitelli, who had control of the feast and was named the feast president in the mid-90s. Little Angelo definitely had involvement in the feast. In fact, if you know anything about his mother, Lucy Spata, she has and still has a stand at San Gennaro. But we'll get to San Gennaro in a bit. Little Angelo's control was starting to open up because by this point, he had established a restaurant food service business as well as a cafe in Brooklyn. He would also start a company called Toy Store Amusements, which essentially became a potpourri instrument for the Colombo crime family to flex their muscles in these feasts. And they would essentially run them. Toy Store Amusements basically contracted vendors, carnival rides, carnival games. He ran everything that involved these feasts, and it allowed little Angelo to make a lot of money, shake down people, fix carnival games. There's a lot of money in these feasts. One of the main feasts that little Angelo basically controlled was the Feast of Santa Rosalia, which is in Brooklyn. It's said that for 10 days, 100 plus vendors run that area, and it allows the mafia to make a pretty penny. Now, the feast was initially controlled by the Gambino crime family, but by the mid-90s, little Angelo Spata was leveraging his involvement in the Persico family to basically seize control of that feast. It was said that little Angelo was responsible for permits, running the books, the money. He shake down people. He rigged casino and carnival games. He was making a lot of money, and it allowed him to do whatever he wanted to do inside the feast. Now, it was also said that just to get a stand at that feast, you would have to kick up $2,500 per stand. So think about it. You have 100 vendors. They're all kicking up $2,500 just to get a spot. You then control them throughout the 10 days that they are there. You're shaking them down. You're making a percentage. Like, there's all sorts of money that comes out of these things. It was said at one point that the San Gennaro feast made the Genovese crime family about $20 million a year. These feasts, now again, aren't the level of San Gennaro, but these feasts are money makers. Now, not only did little Angelo control the feast of Santa Rosalia, but he also controlled other feasts, including ones in the Bronx, as well as ones in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And according to a priest, in fact, a Monsignor that was involved with a feast in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, he would talk very openly about Mr. Spata's role in that. According to the Monsignor Joseph Calise, he would say that Angelo Spata was, quote, the supplier of vendors, meaning that he was in charge of organizing who could and couldn't get a booth. He would also say that his role involved giving businessmen getting cash payments from businessmen of $2,500 under the table. Now, remember, that's also untaxed money. So his role was questionable, but most normal people worked with him, including priests, monsignors, community people as well. Now, little Angelo Spata was also getting a lot of involvement in the community. People worked very closely with him, including Belmont business district people in the Bronx, Brooklyn people. And what Spata was also doing was he was getting all sorts of revered figuredom from different community people, including borough presidents in Brooklyn, Chamber of Commerce people, assemblymen, councilmen. They made him out to be a real good man in the community. Now, the problem was little Angelo was doing some really shady shit as well, including rigging carnival games, shaking down men and women that were vendors. I mean, he was doing all sorts of things. He was making money, but he was sort of this Robin Hood figure. And little Angelo knew that being a revered figure in the community meant that he could probably skate out of things. And that's exactly what he did. At one point, it was also talked about how good of a guy in the community that little Angelo was. In fact, at one point, it was made clear that he would set up Easter egg hunts, Halloween parades, help to set up rides for disabled children. He donated to various diabetes charities, as well as at one point even hosting a national police night out, which is kind of interesting in Bay Ridge. Keep in mind, he's a gangster and he's setting up national police night outs. He would also donate to high schools and was very much involved with philanthropy work in and around Brooklyn. So Spata's doing his thing. We would also learn that he had a pretty interesting role in the San Gennaro Feast as well. Now, San Gennaro has always been controlled by the Genovese crime family, and I've talked about that. But the Feast of San Gennaro would give a great stand spot to Lucy's sausage stand. We would also learn recently that members of the Genovese crime family, including Conrad Ainiello, a relative of Manny the Horse Ainiello, as well as Eugene Rooster D'Onofrio, were very important members to this family involving the San Gennaro Feast. So, I mean, this was the bread and butter for the Genovese crime family. I mean, and for Angelo Spata, we would kind of find out his role a bit, if you will, as well. According to a person called Mort Berkowitz, he would give him a glowing recommendation. He was in control of a certain multiple stands. He would say that the pint-sized businessman was a valuable asset, and he was very helpful in the feast in a variety of ways, including distributing feast applications to vendors, alerting to possible problems, and helping to mediate vendor disputes, lending chairs and tables to other vendors. And we're sure that little Angelo Spata, as well as Rooster D'Onofrio, were involved in probably earning money on both sides, little Angelo being the focus of that. He was making a lot of money. At one point, it was discussed that little Angelo's net worth was in the millions. He was making a lot of money. Now, what he was also doing was he became, out of festival season, he became the liaison between Carmine Persico, who was in prison at Butner, North Carolina. It was said that Spata made regular monthly trips to Butner to relay messages between Persico to his street boss, Tommy Schatz Giuelli. Now, as we know, Persico and his son were the bosses of the family. However, Tommy Schatz was the only one on the street. So little Angelo was ferrying messages to him as well. Now, it's important to realize by this point in the late 90s, early 2000s, little Angelo Spata is not a member of the Colombo crime family. Neither is his father. This would become a very interesting talking point because for as much as little Angelo always did, it always seemed like he got very unlucky when it came time to have induction proceedings. Now, according to the ColomboMafia.com, it was said that Angelo Sr. at one point was proposed for membership. Now, a lot of this didn't really mean that he was going to do much other than feast stuff, but little Angelo and his father were getting hassled, most notably Angelo Sr., so they wanted to kind of prevent that by making him a soldier and giving him kind of that bump up in his later years. Now, he was never ultimately inducted, Angelo Sr., but little Angelo always had to deal with constant problems when it came time to become a made member. Now, a lot of it had to do with the fact, according to Anthony Russo, that there were log jams in the family. There was a lot of people that were proposed to be made, but Anthony Russo would say in wiretap conversations that it wasn't getting done due to the fact that most of the people that were in high-ranking positions in the family were in prison, as well as by the late 2000s, Carmine Persico essentially put this individual, Ralph DeLeo, in control of the family. And Ralph DeLeo really had no involvement in New York. He was based in Connecticut. So there was a lot of logjam at the top of the family. Plus, we would also learn through wiretap conversations that little Angelo Spata was starting to become a real hassle to the Colombo crime family. In fact, at one point, it was made very clear by Russo that he was getting sick of little Angelo by 2009. Was little Angelo Spata making money? Absolutely. But he was starting to act like he was this really important guy and all this stuff. And he was also going back on his word. You know, he was definitely a guy that no one would ever call him to do anything of enforcing or anything. He was definitely a diminutive guy, pint-sized, if you will. By this point as well, it was very clear that Angelo was getting into other businesses as well, including Joker poker machines and illegal gambling. Could he make money? Absolutely. But he was picked on a lot by members, including Anthony Russo. At one point, Anthony Russo would say, quote, "I don't listen to this fucking kid Angelo." He would also call him at one point a jerk off and a nightmare. Now, as I mentioned, he was also little Angelo going back on his word. At one point, it was made clear that he was going to finance a shylocking loan shark operation run by Tommy McLaughlin, a Colombo Crime Family associate who was connected at one point to Dino Calabro, Anthony Russo. Eventually, though, little Angelo would go back on his word and not provide the money that he told Tommy McLaughlin he would. At one point, McLaughlin would say in a wiretap conversation, quote, "I'm going to choke him and snap his fucking windpipe." He never ultimately did. And this was the connections that provided little Angelo with solitude and solace, knowing that they couldn't do anything to him. His connections and familial involvement with Carmine Persico awarded him a lot of, let's just say it, passes. If he wasn't married to Carmine's daughter, he probably wouldn't have been anything in the family. He probably would be nothing more than a street vendor. But his ability to leverage his familial involvement, and as we know, blood family, marriage by family in the Persico group was very important. Spata, by this point, was also getting very chummy with Benji Castellazzo, a high-ranking member in the Colombo crime family. Again, Spata recognizing connections are very important. Now, remember, he's under the auspice of the law. The law's looking into Spata. Spata eventually is arrested. And in fact, this kind of sucks because by late 2010, Castellazzo made it clear in wiretap conversations to various members that by late 2010, little Angelo was going to get his button finally. They were scheduling a ceremony for late 2010. It never ultimately happened. And in June of 2011, on Mob Takedown Day, little Angelo would be arrested by the federal government alongside Andrew Russo, who eventually became the boss of the family. So again, little Angelo just keeps getting very unlucky when he is supposed to be made. He would be freed on $1 million bail after he faced charges of money laundering and illegal gambling. Now, this ultimately ends in a pretty funny situation. Little Angelo, while freed on bail, was getting letters together. He was having priests that knew him talk about how great of a guy he was and his community work. They wanted leniency. He was facing jail time, frankly. Little Angelo was going to have to go to prison. Now, it would get worse at one point in 2013 when Angelo Spata, on November 8, 2013, was arrested at a Coney Island Home Depot for stealing recessed lights. Yes, you have that right. He was stealing lights from Home Depot valued at $164. Now, it's not like little Angelo couldn't afford it. He was a millionaire. And from what his lawyer would say, she would claim that little Angelo Spata bought about $500 worth of merchandise through the self-checkout line, but due to an error, he thought he had scanned the 5 lights in when he actually didn't, and he skated on not paying $165 in the 18 items worth about $500 that he was supposed to pay. They would say it was an error and that he would never actually do this because he actually paid. He just didn't scan them properly. They thought he was trying to just, scan certain things and get a cheaper bill on a lot more items. It ultimately was a kind of a mountain out of a molehill, and he never actually really had any charges on this. He was also facing a higher end federal case anyway, but it was an opportunity for the newspapers to make him look like an embarrassment and all sorts of things. The truth is, though, we don't really know. From what I don't think little Angelo was trying to steal. He probably just didn't realize that they weren't scanning and he just put them into the bag. Um, Look, is he a gangster? For sure. Do I think he's a guy that would steal as a multi-millionaire? No, I don't. I honestly don't. Because he did pay for stuff. He just didn't pay for 5 things. Ultimately, for little Angelo, the calls for leniency actually worked. He would get the low end in his Fed case and ultimately be sentenced to 15 months in federal prison. Little Angelo Spata was released in April of 2015. Since then, over the last 8 years, he has been pretty quiet. In fact, it is still very widely known that he is an associate of the Colombo Crime Family. I have no knowledge that he has ever been made. He's pretty much been pretty quiet. His mother, though, would turn up. Obviously, she still has the sausage stand, and it's run every year in the various feasts. But she would also get a different moniker, the Queen of Christmas. As I said, about 30,000 people descend on Diker Heights each year to see various Christmas displays that were started by Lucy Spata in the 80s. She would tell ABC7 in New York that it's been a beautiful tradition and keeps her alive. She would also discuss that in 2019, her husband, Angelo Spata Sr., passed away and that she keeps it alive for him. She would also say that she has downsized a little bit in her Christmas decorations. But if you're from Brooklyn or from New York, you may have actually seen the Queen of Christmas's light displays, and that they're actually pretty nice, if we're being honest. Seems like one thing we can garner from this video is that on Mother's Day weekend, Lucy Spata seems like a pretty good woman, doesn't she? In the end, though, we haven't heard much from Angelo Spata Jr. Now, I will say one thing that Lucy Spata would say at one point. She was asked by the papers in the 90s about the involvement of her husband and the feast with the mafia. And she would basically kind of belittle the papers, saying, why does anytime we talk about Italians, we have to talk about the mafia? So, I think in these communities, as we know, most of the people that live in them just don't really talk about it. It's just the cost of doing business. And I think that's the truth about crime. And that's what makes the mafia so interesting, is that they generally have the hearts and minds of the community that they operate in. Most people are perfectly fine with doing business with the mob. Now, Angelo Spata kicked up to the mafia for years, and he taught his son the same thing. But eventually his son realized, I want to get the money sent to me as opposed to kicking up. Little Angelo's an interesting guy, and he definitely knew how to play the game. He never actually got made, though, from it. I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll see you next week here on The Sit Down.